The room froze as Kellyanne Conway leaned in with a smug grin, her words dripping with the certainty of someone convinced the night belonged to her. Cameras flashed like lightning across the stage, catching every flicker of satisfaction on her face. She straightened her shoulders, voice sharpened to a point, and delivered what she clearly believed would be the finishing blow. "This isn't about feelings, Congresswoman. These are the facts. And the facts don't care about your outrage." Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave breaking on stone. It wasn't just the arrogance of her tone. It was the way she wielded the word facts, as if it were a shield no one could pierce, as if her history of spin and manipulation hadn't made the very idea laughable. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see if Jasmine Crockett would flinch, waiting to see if Conway's infamous verbal daggers would finally find their mark. Kellyanne basked in the tension. She had done this before, cornered, pressured, dominated. She wore the same grin she'd worn on cable news countless times, the grin of someone who thrived on confrontation. To her, this was just another day at the office, another chance to humiliate, to undermine, to remind the country who still held the microphone. But the silence that followed wasn't one of triumph. It was heavy, uncomfortable, almost cinematic in its weight. The audience could feel the electricity shift in the air, a storm forming in the pause. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her gaze steady. Not rattled, not outraged, not even blinking. The composure was striking, almost defiant in itself, and that composure began to gnaw at the edges of Conway's performance. For a moment, her smirk faltered, as if she couldn't understand why her strike hadn't drawn blood. She cleared her throat, doubled down, and raised her voice. "You can tweet all the slogans you want, but when it comes to the truth, you don't get to rewrite it." The room stirred. Phones came up. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. Something far bigger than a talking point exchange was brewing. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to play by Kellyanne's rules. To understand why this moment carried such weight, you had to look beyond the stage lights and sound bites. This wasn't just two political figures trading barbs. It was a battle over who gets to define truth in America. On one side stood Kellyanne Conway, polished and battle-tested in the art of rhetorical combat, a woman who had built a career-bending language until it broke. On the other side was Jasmine Crockett, still newer to the national spotlight, but armed with the kind of authenticity that couldn't be rehearsed or spun. The stakes weren't abstract. They were as real as the millions of people who had seen their lives reduced to sound bites, as personal as the immigrant families who had been told they didn't belong, as urgent as the young voters demanding leaders who spoke with conviction, rather than calculation. When Conway leaned in with her grin and her facts, she wasn't just cornering Crockett, she was attempting to corner the very idea of progress, to trap dignity under the weight of rehearsed arrogance. Kellyanne Conway thrived in these spaces. She projected the calm of someone who had sparred with primetime anchors and walked away unscathed. She knew how to interrupt, how to dismiss, how to layer confidence over contradiction until it became a kind of performance art. Her voice carried, with it, the air of inevitability. "I've done this before, and I'll do it again." The audience could see it in the way she gestured, in the deliberate cadence of her words. She wasn't just speaking, she was daring Jasmine Crockett to interrupt, her rhythm, to challenge the well-worn dance of manipulation. For Conway, this was muscle memory. For Jasmine, it was a test she had been preparing for her entire life. Because beneath the polished insults and barbed fact-checks lay the deeper stakes, a nation deciding whether to be swayed once more by a politics of dominance, or to rally around voices rooted in service and truth. The tension in the room wasn't accidental. It was curated by Conway, who knew that drawing out the silence, letting her words echo, would magnify their sting. She looked out at the crowd, with that same smirk, convinced she had seized the narrative. She believed she had the upper hand, that Crockett was cornered, that this would be just another viral clip cementing her reputation as the master of the verbal kill shot. And yet, something was shifting. The cameras caught the smallest signs. Jasmine's steady breathing, her refusal to break eye contact, her silence that spoke louder than any interruption. The audience felt it too, a creeping sense that the trap Conway had set might be about to backfire, because what Kellyanne didn't see, or perhaps refused to see, was that silence can be strategy. Stillness can be power. And when wielded correctly, restraint can be the sharpest weapon of all. Every second that Jasmine sat poised and unshaken, the suspense grew thicker, the air heavier. What would she say? How would she strike back? Could she really dismantle the seasoned manipulator sitting across from her? Viewers online typed furiously, predicting disaster or breakthrough. Clips were already being trimmed for social feeds, pundits preparing their hot takes in real time. Everyone sensed something big was about to happen, but no one could quite predict how it would unfold. The trap was set, but what came next stunned everyone watching. To understand why Kellyanne Conway entered that stage so certain of her victory, you have to trace the long arc of her career, a career defined not by truth, but by her ability to warp it. From the early days of her rise as a pollster and strategist, Conway learned that politics wasn't just about policy, it was about perception. And perception, she believed, could be sculpted like clay. Her name became household currency during the Trump years, not because she offered clarity, but because she thrived in chaos. Who can forget that morning in January 2017, when she coined the phrase alternative facts with a straight face? The term ricocheted across the globe, instantly becoming a symbol of everything wrong with a politics that treated truth as optional. For Conway, though, it was just another day on the job. She had delivered her line, watched anchors fumble in shock, and smiled as the debate shifted from accountability to semantics. That was her genius: never win the argument, but always win the moment. She wielded words like a duelist wielding a rapier, precise, sharp, and designed to leave her opponent bleeding from cuts they didn't even notice until too late. She could interrupt with a smile, dismiss with a laugh, or pivot so hard that a question would collapse under its own weight. And for years, it worked. She stood on some of the biggest stages in American politics and walked away unscathed, leaving behind sound bites that drowned out the very facts she pretended to defend. Arrogance wasn't a side effect of her career. It was its foundation. Kellyanne Conway carried herself with the conviction that she could outtalk anyone, outmaneuver any trap, outspin any disaster. When scandals swirled around the administration she defended, she turned it into an opportunity. When reporters pressed for clarity, she leaned harder into the fog. Each appearance reinforced the persona of a woman untouchable, unshakable, unbothered. And yet, contradictions trailed her like shadows she could never quite shake. She claimed to champion truth while living as its most visible contortionist. She spoke of family values, while her own household was riven by public political feuds. Her husband a vocal critic of the very White House she propped up. She branded herself a woman of principle, yet those principles shifted depending on the network, the interviewer, or the headline. Her greatest skill was making opponents underestimate her. They would come armed with facts and moral outrage, only to find themselves tangled in her web of half-truths and clever pivots. She would smirk, let them drown in their own explanations, then land a cutting remark that would dominate the evening news cycle. For Kellyanne, that was the point. Not to win hearts, but to control the narrative. But that long record of slippery victories also bred complacency. It hardened into arrogance, the belief that every stage was hers to command. Every microphone, hers to twist. Every opponent, hers to embarrass. And that arrogance carried her into this confrontation with Jasmine Crockett. What Conway didn't recognize, or perhaps refused to admit, was that the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Audiences were no longer content to let smirks and spin define reality. Social media had turned fact checks into instant viral rebuttals. Younger voices, hungrier for authenticity, had little patience for recycled talking points. And Jasmine, Crockett, sharp, relentless, grounded in truth, embodied that shift more than anyone else on that stage. Still, Conway walked in with the same confidence she had wielded for years. She believed she knew the playbook. She believed she could corner Jasmine the way she had cornered so many others. She believed the smug grin, the cutting phrases, the weaponized facts would land as they always had. But what she didn't account for was the power of authenticity. She didn't anticipate that silence could be louder than a retort, that calm composure could undercut smugness, that dignity could draw an audience to the edge of their seats in a way arrogance never could. Kellyanne Conway built her reputation on dominating conversations, but in this moment, that very history was her weakness. Every smirk, every dismissive phrase, every arrogant gesture set the stage for her undoing. The audience wasn't just listening to the words, they were remembering the years of spin, the years of manipulation, the years of alternative facts that had eroded trust. Her history wasn't a shield. It was a burden she carried into every exchange, and Jasmine Crockett was waiting. The irony was rich. Conway had spent years perfecting the art of controlling a room, yet now she stood on the edge of losing it all. In a single exchange, her weapon of choice, language itself, was about to turn against her. The very confidence she wore like armor would become the crack in her defense. But Conway had never faced someone like Jasmine Crockett before. Long before the lights of the stage caught her face, Jasmine Crockett had been forged in a very different kind of fire. She didn't emerge from think tanks or polished political machines. She came from neighborhoods where injustice wasn't an abstract talking point, it was lived reality. For Jasmine, politics wasn't a performance. It was survival, service, and sacrifice. Her path began in the streets, not the studios. As an attorney, she stood shoulder to shoulder with clients who had no money, no power, no allies. She took on cases others dismissed as unwinnable, fighting for those society had already decided were expendable. The courtroom became her training ground, the place where she learned that silence could be as powerful as argument, that patience could dismantle arrogance, and that every word carried weight when someone's life hung in the balance. Those battles didn't make her bitter. They made her resilient. She carried with her the calm of someone who had seen intimidation up close and had refused to bow. When landlords preyed on tenants, when police overreach tore families apart, Jasmine was the voice that cut through the noise. Not with theatrics, but with clarity. Not with spin, but with truth. That authenticity wasn't a strategy. It was who she was. Unlike Kellyanne Conway, Jasmine never learned to treat words like weapons. She treated them like promises, bonds between leader and people, between justice and those who had been denied it. In a political landscape drowning in slogans and sound bites, her refusal to posture made her stand out. She wasn't there to dominate. She was there to represent, and representation meant sacrifice. While others sought comfort in compromise, Jasmine often chose the harder path. She worked late nights drafting briefs no one else wanted to touch, knowing that each case could ripple beyond a single life. She endured smears, dismissals, and underestimation, the constant undercurrent of being a black woman in spaces designed to exclude her. Yet instead of bending, she grew sharper, steadier, more unshakable. Each insult became fuel. Each obstacle, training. That unshakable presence became her hallmark. In community meetings, she didn't rush to speak. First, she listened. In rallies, she didn't shout louder than the crowd, she amplified them. And in debates, she didn't lunge for cheap shots. She laid out truth like a steady drumbeat, until arrogance collapsed under its own weight. This authenticity gave her a kind of armor Kellyanne Conway could never understand. Conway's shield, was manipulation, a constant performance that had to be maintained. Jasmine's shield was the absence of performance altogether. She had nothing to fake, nothing to spin, nothing to conceal. That left her opponents swinging at air, frustrated when their usual tricks fell flat against someone who simply refused to play the game. It also gave her a special kind of power with audiences. People didn't just hear Jasmine, they felt seen by her. Immigrants, working families, young activists, they recognized themselves in her battles, in her sacrifices, in her quiet insistence on dignity. She wasn't speaking at them, she was speaking with them. That bond turned her words into more than arguments. They became collective affirmations, reminders that truth could still stand in a world drowning in spin. Her legal background prepared her uniquely for this showdown. Lawyers learn to anticipate not just arguments, but tactics. They study body language, cadence, the art of the pause. Jasmine knew how to spot the moment when overconfidence tipped into vulnerability. She had seen witnesses crumble under their own contradictions. She had seen prosecutors overplay their hand. She knew arrogance always created openings she had spent years learning to seize. That was why, as Conway leaned in with her smug grin, Jasmine didn't blink. She had seen this kind of theater before. Different stage, different stakes, same script. And she had spent a lifetime dismantling it, piece by piece. It's what made her calm so unnerving to Conway. Because Jasmine's stillness wasn't passivity. It was precision. She was listening not to be cornered, but to prepare the counterstrike. And unlike the pundits and anchors Conway had faced before, Jasmine didn't need to perform for the cameras. Her truth was enough. The irony was that Kellyanne's arrogance only sharpened Jasmine's focus. Every smirk reminded her of the countless times powerful voices had tried to silence her clients. Every cutting remark echoed the dismissals she had endured in courtrooms. Every boast about facts felt like the hollow taunts of those who used rules to crush rather than protect. Jasmine had dismantled that kind of arrogance before. She could do it again this time in front of a national audience. In that way, Jasmine represented more than herself. She was standing in for everyone who had ever been told their truth didn't matter, for every immigrant who had been told to go back, for every working mother dismissed as unqualified, for every young activist told to wait their turn. She was proof that authenticity, once ignored, now had the power to take center stage. And so, as the cameras rolled and Conway sharpened her grin, Jasmine Crockett sat steady, carrying with her the weight of every sacrifice, every fight, every injustice she had already stared down. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. So when Kellyanne made her move, Jasmine was ready with the unthinkable. Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her voice rising with the confidence of a veteran fighter who believed she had her opponent pinned. The lights glared, the cameras zoomed, and every syllable she delivered dripped with the certainty that she had cornered Jasmine Crockett. "You keep bringing up feelings, Congresswoman," Conway sneered, her cadence quickening like a boxer, throwing combinations. "But let's deal with facts. Hard facts. The economy under your party's watch has stumbled, crime is rising in your cities, and your so-called solutions? They don't work. Numbers don't lie. People are worse off because of your policies. You can spin, you can grandstand, but the truth? It's right here, and you can't escape it." The words fell heavy, punctuated with her familiar smirk, as if she had just delivered a knockout punch. Conway sat back for a moment, savoring the silence that followed, expecting the audience to absorb her triumph. She even tilted her chin slightly, signaling she believed she had seized the narrative. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't shuffle papers or clear her throat. She didn't even interrupt, which was Conway's favorite opening to exploit. Instead, she held her ground with the composure of someone who had weathered storms far more dangerous than a political talking point. Her eyes fixed on Conway, steady, unblinking, and devastating in their stillness. The contrast was jarring. Conway's gestures grew bigger, her voice sharper, her tone dripping with sarcasm. She sensed the audience wasn't fully on her side yet, so she pressed harder, piling on layers of statistics and selective data points. Look, Jasmine, you can call me names. You can throw shade all you want, but when we strip it all down, the facts remain. And you can't refute them. Numbers are numbers. And you, frankly, are drowning in them, the audience murmured, a restless sound spreading through the room. Some leaned forward, curious to see how Crockett would answer. Others frowned, uneasy, at the smugness in Conway's tone. On social media, the clip was already being clipped and captioned. Conway corners Crockett with facts. Tweets poured in with premature victory laps, yet Jasmine remained unshaken. She didn't rush to grab the microphone, didn't let Conway's words dictate her rhythm. She simply listened, calm as a statue, absorbing each jab with the patience of someone waiting for an opponent to exhaust themselves. The silence stretched so long that even Conway grew restless, repeating herself, filling the air with words that began to sound less like a symphony and more like noise. And that was the trap Conway couldn't see. The more she spoke, the more she revealed her overconfidence. What had started as a crisp attack now began to unravel into condescension, the kind that audiences recognize not as strength, but as arrogance. Her smirk widened into a grin that looked forced, her tone edged into a shrillness she hadn't intended. By now the room was divided between tension and anticipation. Was Jasmine rattled? Was she frozen? Or was something else happening beneath that composed exterior? The cameras panned across the stage, catching every angle of Conway's performance, but also every second of Crockett's composure. And that composure became magnetic. Viewers at home tweeted about it. Why isn't she moving? Why isn't she biting? Commentators whispered in real time. She's waiting. She's timing this. Even the audience in the room began to shift in their seats, sensing that the silence was no accident. Conway, too blinded by her own momentum, didn't notice. She mistook the quiet for submission, the stillness for defeat. Her tone turned mocking, patronizing. So tell me, Congresswoman, do you have anything to say in response to these facts? Or will you just keep pouting in silence while the truth does my job for me? The words hung in the air like a final taunt, a gauntlet thrown. Conway leaned back once more, convinced she had just closed the case, convinced she had written the headline before the ink had even dried. The audience held its collective breath. The cameras lingered on Jasmine, waiting for the first sign of reaction. The moment stretched, suspended, as if time itself was leaning in. Then, slowly, Jasmine shifted. She raised her chin just slightly, a subtle movement that sent a ripple through the silence. Her lips parted, not hurriedly, not defensively, but with a calm so deliberate it commanded every ear in the room. But Jasmine's first words flipped the atmosphere instantly. The silence fractured with Jasmine Crockett's voice, low and deliberate, slicing through the air like the opening note of a song the audience didn't know they'd been waiting for. Kellyanne, she began, her tone calm but cutting. You've built a career on presenting spin as substance. But let's walk through your so-called facts, one by one, and see just how sturdy they really are. The room shifted. What had been a stage owned by Conway now belonged to Crockett. Even before she continued, the weight of her composure commanded attention. Conway leaned forward, still smirking, but the first flicker of doubt crossed her face. Jasmine paused just long enough for the anticipation to build, and then struck. You talk about the economy. You cherry-pick a handful of numbers as if they exist in a vacuum. But here's a fact you forgot to mention. Wages for working families were stagnating long before you started celebrating those corporate tax cuts. Another fact? Under the administration you defended, farmers were crushed by trade wars, small businesses shuttered, and debt ballooned to historic levels. Numbers don't lie. Kellyanne, but liars do pick their numbers carefully. The crowd gasped, a ripple of energy surging across the room. Conway's smirk faltered. She tried to interject, but Jasmine raised a hand slightly, palm open, not aggressively, just enough to signal she was still speaking. And the audience wanted her to continue. Now crime, Jasmine continued, her voice steady as a drumbeat. You want to paint my communities as dangerous? Let's talk about who actually suffered during your administration. Hate crimes spiked. White nationalist violence rose to levels we hadn't seen in decades. Families lived in fear not because of their neighbors, but because of the rhetoric pouring from the White House podiums you defended. Murmurs of agreement rolled through the crowd, punctuated by applause. Conway shifted in her seat, her body betraying the unease her face was trying to mask. The confidence that had animated her gestures earlier was thinning, her hands now clasping tighter together, her grin tightening into something brittle. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked. On Conway, and let's not pretend you've ever had a monopoly on truth. You introduced America to the phrase alternative facts. That wasn't just a gaffe, it was a manifesto. You admitted to the nation that for you, truth is optional. That facts are whatever you need them to be in the moment. And you've lived by that motto ever since. But here's the thing. The American people are tired of being told that lies are just another perspective. They deserve leaders who will level with them even when the truth is uncomfortable. The crowd erupted this time, loud and sustained, the kind of applause that forced the moderators to raise their hands for order. Social media feeds lit up in real time. Jasmine is cooking. This is how you dismantle a liar. Clips of her words were already racing across Twitter with captions like, "Alternative facts meet actual facts." Conway's face flushed. She shifted in her chair, searching for a rebuttal, but every movement betrayed the cracks forming in her armor. Jasmine pressed on, her rhythm flawless, her cadence rising just enough to match the energy in the room. You say people are worse off under us? Let's talk about who us really is. Us are the nurses who held this country together through a pandemic while your party dismissed their pleas for equipment. Us are the immigrants who pick our food, build our homes, and serve in our military while you tell them they don't belong. Us are the young voters who want a planet to inherit, not one consumed by profit-driven denial. You dismiss them as slogans, but they are America. They are the truth you keep trying to bend, but they will not bend for you. The crowd was on its feet now. Shouts of approval, chants building, the atmosphere electric. Conway glanced at the audience, her smirk entirely gone, her eyes betraying something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was losing. And worse, she was losing to someone who hadn't even raised her voice. Jasmine let the roar of the crowd simmer before she delivered her final strikes. She lowered her tone, forcing the audience to lean in again. You accuse me of drowning in numbers, Kellyanne. But the only thing drowning here tonight is your credibility. Because every time you try to weaponize a statistic, you reveal the truth about yourself. You're not here to solve problems. You're here to score points. You're not here for facts. You're here for spin. And America has had enough spin to last a lifetime. The crowd thundered, the floor almost vibrating under the eruption of applause. On Twitter, hashtags began trending within minutes. Our Jasmine flips. The stage. Facts v. spin. Mic drop moment. Conway's eyes darted, her lips pressing together as though the words she wanted to hurl were caught in her throat. For once, she had no pivot, no clever redirection. The silence she had once wielded against others now suffocated her. And then Jasmine delivered the line that cemented the moment. Facts. Don't care about your spin, Kellyanne. And tonight, neither does America. The crowd exploded, standing ovation, chants echoing like a rally. Journalists in the back scrambled to file their stories, while on screens across the nation, viewers tweeted, posted, and texted their friends, "You have to see this. Jasmine just ended her." It was the moment everything flipped. Conway, once the master of the verbal stage, sat diminished, her arrogance stripped bare. Jasmine Crockett, calm and unshaken, had taken every so-called fact and turned it into evidence not of her weakness, but of her opponent's hollowness. The debate hall shook with the weight of the shift, the energy carrying far beyond the walls of that room. It was no longer just a debate, it was a reckoning, and yet the ripple effects had only just begun. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her final line, the atmosphere in the hall transformed from tense anticipation into unrestrained eruption. The roar of the audience was deafening cheers, applause, chants of her name swelling until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. Moderators tried to restore order, but the tidal wave of energy couldn't be contained. The crowd wasn't just reacting, they were celebrating. It was clear to everyone in the room. Something seismic had just happened. Within minutes, that energy spilled into the digital world. Twitter feeds lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. Clips of Jasmine's dismantling of Conway spread with dizzying speed. Her calm takedown of alternative facts was clipped, captioned, and shared, under hashtags that trended within the hour. Yet should Jasmine flips the stage. That facts overspin. Nice mic drop moment. Memes poured in one side by side of Conway's smirk before, and her stunned silence after went viral in less than 10 minutes. Another meme plastered Jasmine's final line across the screen like a movie poster. "Facts don't care about your spin, Kellyanne." On TikTok, reaction videos racked up millions of views in real time. Young creators lip-synced Jasmine's mic drop moment, pairing it with fire emojis and soundtracks of explosions. Instagram feeds filled with screenshots and story shares. Jasmine pointing calmly, Conway shrinking back. It wasn't just political junkies paying attention, it was everyone. She had broken out of the narrow confines of debate footage and landed squarely in pop culture. News outlets scrambled to catch up. CNN ran a chyron. Crockett confronts Conway. Facts don't care about your spin. MSNBC cut into programming with panelists practically giddy, calling it the most devastating real-time fact-check in years. Even international outlets picked up the story, framing Jasmine Crockett as a rising voice of authenticity in an era of cynicism. Commentators couldn't resist piling on. Podcasters clipped the exchange as proof that the old school of political trickery was finally meeting its match. Late-night hosts teased previews for their monologues, hinting they had already written jokes at Conway's expense. By morning, the headlines would all say the same thing. Jasmine Crockett had not only survived, she had dominated. Celebrities joined the chorus. Actors, musicians, and athletes tweeted their admiration. One Grammy winner posted, "Jasmine Crockett just gave us all the energy we needed tonight. That's how you do it." A beloved sitcom star shared the clip with the caption, "Teach a masterclass, Congresswoman." The amplification ensured Jasmine's words reached far beyond political circles, embedding themselves in everyday conversations. Meanwhile, Kellyanne Conway faded quickly into the background of ridicule. The smirk that had once been her calling card became a meme template overnight, rebranded as the "before the flop" face. One trending post compared her attempt to corner Jasmine with facts to bringing a water pistol to a wildfire. Even her usual defenders on conservative outlets struggled to spin the moment, their voices edged with unease as they tried to dismiss Jasmine's victory as theatrics. But the problem for Conway was simple. The image of her silence, her forced grin crumbling, was more powerful than any spin she could attempt. What made Jasmine's win so profound wasn't just that she beat Kellyanne Conway. It was that she tapped into something bigger, a hunger for authenticity in a political world drowning in manipulation. Her calm composure, her refusal to rise to cheap bait, her reliance on truth over theatrics, These qualities resonated with millions, who had grown weary of noise. Her words didn't just win a debate, they ignited a movement. In the days that followed, her lines were repeated in classrooms, boardrooms, even sermons. Teachers used them to explain the importance of truth. Activists held up signs quoting her as they marched. College students wrote essays dissecting her rhetorical precision. She had provided not just a viral moment, but a cultural touchstone, something people could rally around. It was cinematic in its ripple effect. The debate hall had been the stage, but the world became the audience. Jasmine Crockett's takedown was replayed in living rooms, break rooms, and family group chats. Parents pointed to her composure as an example for their children. Young organizers used her clip to inspire volunteers. Communities that had long felt unseen saw in her a validation of their struggles. And while Conway slipped further into the background, Jasmine's star only rose. Her name trended not just as a participant in a debate, but as a symbol of dignity standing tall against arrogance. She had rewritten the script, proving that truth delivered calmly could shatter even the loudest spin. But beyond the headlines, the real lesson was even deeper. When the cheers subsided and the headlines began to fade into the digital ether, what remained was not just a viral clip or a trending hashtag. What remained was the truth of the moment, the lesson that dignity outlasts arrogance and service outshines manipulation. The clash between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett was never only about numbers or policy disputes. It was about the eternal contest between truth and spin, between authenticity and artifice, between the kind of politics that seeks to uplift and the kind that seeks only to dominate. Jasmine Crockett's calm composure was more than a debating tactic. It was a statement about how real leadership operates. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need to belittle her opponent to rise above her. She simply allowed the truth to do what truth always does when spoken clearly: cut through the noise, illuminate the room, and force people to see what had been hiding in plain sight. And that is why her victory resonated so deeply. In a time when arrogance has often been mistaken for strength, she reminded the country that true strength lies in patience, in preparation, and in the courage to stand firm even as an opponent throws every distraction at you. Where Kellyanne Conway used smugness as a weapon, Jasmine Crockett used silence, focus, and clarity. One sought to control the narrative through manipulation. The other offered the audience something far more powerful: authentic service and truth. This is why the moment felt bigger than a debate. It felt like a reclamation. For every immigrant who has been told their story didn't count, Jasmine's presence said otherwise. For every working parent dismissed as unqualified, her resilience stood as a rebuke. For every young activist mocked for caring too much, her words validated their fire. She showed that politics doesn't have to be theater for the arrogant, but can instead be a platform for those who refuse to forget where they came from and who they serve. Justice doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the calm confidence of a woman refusing to bend. And authenticity doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. It often speaks softly, with the kind of clarity that reverberates long after the noise has faded. Jasmine Crockett's stand was a reminder that the American spirit, at its best, is not defined by who can shout the loudest, but by who can stand the strongest in the face of dishonesty. Moments like these remind us why truth matters. Because when truth is spoken, not shouted, not spun, but spoken, it has the power to pierce through even the most carefully constructed illusions. Jasmine didn't just win an exchange. She reminded a weary public that facts, wielded with dignity, are stronger than any arsenal of spin. She showed that service, rooted in sacrifice, will always carry more weight than manipulation rooted in ego. For those watching, the lesson was clear. America does not need more performers in politics. It needs leaders who reflect the values of the people they represent. Leaders who treat every word as a promise, every platform as an opportunity to uplift. Jasmine Crockett embodied that truth in a single moment, and the country responded because it was hungry for it. And so as the dust settled and the hashtags trended, what endured was not just the memory of Kellyanne Conway's unraveling, but the image of Jasmine Crockett standing steady, her voice unwavering, her truth unshaken. That image, that calm defiance, will echo far longer than the applause. And that's why this debate will be remembered for years. Kellyanne tried to corner Jasmine with facts, but Jasmine turned the tables instantly. What began as Conway's moment of smug certainty ended as Crockett's triumph of calm, clarity, and truth. The arrogance that once dominated headlines was stripped bare in real time, replaced with the dignity of a woman who refused to be rattled, refused to be silenced, and refused to let spin stand taller than substance. And that is why this story matters beyond the stage. It isn't just about who won an argument, it's about what kind of leadership we choose to uplift. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the very idea that truth can still prevail in a political culture addicted to noise. Her victory belongs not only to her, but to every person watching who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told that their voice didn't matter. So here is the call. Stand for dignity. Share truth. Don't let arrogance win. This is more than a debate clip, it's a reminder of what happens when composure meets manipulation, when service outlasts selfishness, when authenticity crushes arrogance. And it's a reminder that each of us has the power to amplify those values, to share them, to make sure they echo far beyond one stage. If this moment moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe for more, share this story with those who need it, and join the growing movement of voices who refuse to bow to spin. Every click, every share, every conversation is a step toward reclaiming truth in a time that desperately needs it. The stage was flipped, and America was watching.